I was invited to a family barbecue, expecting a relaxing afternoon. Instead, I arrived to find everyone doing yard work and was told to help clean up dog mess and clear the garden. I politely declined, feeling judged and awkward. Later, some posted online calling me lazy. Though it stung, I don't regret leaving. I learned the importance of clear boundaries, self-respect, and trusting my instincts, no matter others' opinions. My name is Cheryl, and I'm 34 years old. I live in a quiet little town just outside of Eugene, Oregon, where the days tend to roll by gently, marked by the sound of lawnmowers in the distance or the smell of someone's barbecue drifting through the air. I work in marketing for a small outdoor gear company, and most of my time is split between my job, my boyfriend Mark, and our dog, Daisy. I'm just an ordinary woman who enjoys simple pleasures, good food, long walks, and weekends that don't feel rushed. Before I get too far into my story, I want to invite anyone reading or listening to drop a comment with where you're from and what time it is for you right now. I always think it's fun to see how people from all over the world connect over little stories like this. It was a Wednesday morning when I got the text. I remember because I was working from home that day, still in my pajama pants, sipping coffee while Daisy snored at my feet. The text came from my ex-husband's stepdad, Ron. Now that might sound strange, getting invited anywhere by your ex's family, but to be honest, things between me and my ex's family had always been friendly enough. I'd been married to Jake for 5 years, and while the marriage didn't work out, we parted on civil terms. His family, especially his mom and stepdad, had been kind to me during and even after the divorce. We didn't talk often, but when I did hear from them, it was usually an invite to some casual gathering. Ron's text was simple. Something like, "Hey Cheryl, we're having a barbecue on Saturday at noon. Would love to see you and Mark. Bring something if you like." I smiled when I read it. It felt nice to be included. Mark and I had only been dating for about a year at that point, and I knew he'd never met Jake's side of the family. But Mark's easygoing. He always says yes to food and company. I texted him about it, and as I expected, he said, "Sure, why not? Could be fun." I spent the next couple of days thinking about what to bring. Food has always been my love language. My mom used to say that no gathering was complete without at least one dish that tasted like home. For me, that dish is my mom's pasta salad. I can still picture her standing at our old kitchen counter, chopping bright red peppers and green onions, stirring the noodles with her favorite wooden spoon that had a crack down the middle. Every time I make that pasta salad, I feel like she's there with me in the kitchen. So that was decided, pasta salad. But I didn't want to show up with just one dish. I also planned to whip up a potato salad with dill and a touch of mustard, something that always goes fast at cookouts. I even picked up a few packs of fancy sausages from a local butcher, the kind with apple and sage that Mark loves. In the days leading up to the barbecue, I found myself getting kind of excited. It felt good to have something to look forward to. I imagined us sitting on a sunny patio, plates full of food, Mark finally meeting people who had been part of my life during a different chapter. I pictured easy conversation, cold drinks, and maybe even a few awkward, but well-meaning jokes from Ron about how it wasn't so bad that Jake and I had split, because now everyone got along fine. On Friday night, Mark and I stood in the kitchen together, getting everything ready. He chopped herbs while I boiled the potatoes. We talked about what the day might be like. He asked questions about who'd be there, and I tried to give him the lay of the land. Ron and Linda, probably Jake's sister and her husband, maybe a cousin or two. I mentioned that Jake himself might not come. He lived a few hours away now and usually skipped smaller family gatherings. Mark asked if I was nervous. I said no at first, but the truth was, I did feel a little flutter in my stomach. Not because I thought anything bad would happen, but because blending parts of your past with your present always feels a little strange. I wanted the day to go smoothly. I wanted Mark to see what I meant when I said that my ex's family had always been kind people. That night, I laid out the dress I planned to wear. It was a light blue sundress with white flowers, comfortable and casual but still cute. I paired it with a soft cardigan in case it got chilly and my favorite sandals. Mark planned to wear shorts and a polo, easy and relaxed. We went to bed that night feeling good about the plan. The next morning, I was up early. The kitchen filled with the smell of fresh herbs and vinegar as I finished the salads. I double-checked that everything was packed and ready. As we drove over to Ron's place, I remember feeling the warmth of the sun through the windshield, the kind of perfect summer day that makes you want to linger outdoors. We talked about what songs we'd add to our own barbecue playlist someday, and Daisy snored softly in the back seat, heading to stay with my sister for the afternoon. I kept glancing at Mark and thinking how lucky I felt. Here I was, heading to a gathering with someone who made me feel steady, someone who didn't mind showing up at my ex's family barbecue, because he trusted me and wanted to be part of my world. I remember looking out at the rolling fields as we neared Ron's house and thinking, this is what peace looks like. As we pulled up to the house, I could already smell the charcoal burning. I saw a few familiar faces milling about, and I felt a rush of nostalgia. Ron stood by the side gate, waving us in. The backyard looked just like I remembered, wide and open, with a patio at the center, surrounded by flower beds and a few scraggly trees that provided shade. The grill was already going and a table sat waiting for side dishes and drinks. It all felt so normal, so easy. I carried the big bowl of pasta salad with both hands, careful not to spill, while Mark grabbed the cooler with the sausages and drinks. We walked through the gate with smiles, ready for an afternoon of good food, light conversation, and maybe a little laughter about old times. Of course, I didn't know then what the day would actually hold. But in that moment, standing in the sun, hearing the soft hum of conversation, and smelling the smoke of the grill, everything seemed simple. And I felt ready. Ready to share this piece of my history with Mark, ready to eat good food, ready to enjoy a summer day that I thought would be just like all the other good barbecues I'd known. The drive over to Ron's house had been one of those peaceful summer drives that makes you feel like everything is exactly as it should be. The windows were down, letting in the warm breeze that smelled faintly of pine and fresh-cut grass. Mark had his hand resting on my knee, and the radio played one of those easygoing playlists full of songs you hum along to without thinking. I remember glancing over at him, his sunglasses on, his hair a little messy from the wind, and thinking how glad I was that he was with me for this. I wasn't nervous exactly, but I did have that little buzz of energy in my chest, the kind you get before seeing people you haven't been around in a while. I kept imagining how it would go. I pictured us stepping into the backyard and being met with smiles, laughter, the clink of glasses, and the smell of something delicious already on the grill. I imagined conversations about work, vacations, harmless gossip about neighbors. I imagined introducing Mark and feeling proud of the life we were building together. When we turned onto Ron Street, I could see a few cars parked out front. It was the usual mix, a couple of beat-up trucks that probably belonged to the cousins, a minivan I recognized as Linda's, Ron's old Chevy. We parked along the curb, and for a second, Mark and I just sat there, letting the last notes of the song fade out, taking a breath. "You ready for this?" he asked, giving me that easy grin that always settled my nerves. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. I smoothed my dress, checked my reflection in the mirror, my hair was holding up despite the breeze, the soft blue of my dress still crisp and clean, and we got out. The second I opened the car door, the smell of charcoal hit me. It was one of those familiar scents that immediately made me think of long weekends and lazy afternoons. But underneath it, there was something else, something earthy and damp that didn't quite fit. I figured maybe Ron had been doing some gardening or someone had turned on a sprinkler. We grabbed our things, Mark lifting the cooler like it weighed nothing, me cradling my big glass bowl of pasta salad with a dish towel tucked under it to keep it steady. As we walked toward the gate, I could hear voices, not the loud, easy laughter I'd expected, but more clipped, focused tones. Ron spotted us as we came up the path. He was by the side gate, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that looked like it had seen better days, sweat darkening the color. He waved, but it wasn't that big, hearty wave I was used to. It was quick, distracted. "Hey, you too," he said, pushing open the gate for us. "Glad you made it." I stepped into the yard and paused, taking it in. The yard itself hadn't changed, the big patio with the cracked stones where the chairs were usually set out, the patchy grass leading out toward the back fence, the raised beds where Ron always tried to grow tomatoes that never quite made it. The grill was smoking quietly in the corner, but no one was gathered around it. Instead, people were scattered around the yard, not sitting, not with plates or drinks in hand, but busy. Jake's sister, Melissa, was pulling weeds from the flower bed, her hair tied up, gloves on. One of the cousins was hauling a bag of mulch across the lawn. Linda stood by the patio with a broom, sweeping dirt and leaves into a pile. It wasn't the scene I'd pictured. There was no music playing, no folding chairs set up in a circle, no table with chips and dip waiting for us. Just the sound of people working, the scrape of the broom, the rustle of weeds being yanked, the thud of the mulch bag hitting the ground. Mark glanced at me, his brow creasing just a little. I forced a smile, hoping maybe this was just a quick tidy up before the fun started. Where should I put this?" I asked, nodding at the pasta salad. Ron pointed vaguely toward the patio table, where a few unopened bags of charcoal Saturday. "Just set it there for now," he said. "We're getting things cleaned up before we start." We made our way across the yard, weaving around tools and bags of garden stuff. I could feel the sun on my shoulders, warm but not too hot, and I felt good in my dress, light, comfortable, like I'd chosen right. But as I set down the bowl and looked around again, I felt a little out of place. Everyone else was dressed for yard work, old jeans, t-shirts, sneakers. I glanced down at my sandals, my toes painted a soft pink, and felt a little silly. Linda came over and gave me a quick hug, but it was distracted, like her mind was on the broom she'd set down. "Thanks for coming, Cheryl," she said. "And you must be Mark. Good to meet you." Mark smiled and shook her hand, always polite, always steady. "Looks like you've got a project going," I said, trying to keep my tone light, trying not to sound as thrown off as I felt. "Oh yeah," Linda said, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Trying to get the yard ready. We're putting in a greenhouse next week, so we need to clear a space, get the patio cleaned up, you know how it is." I nodded slowly, though I didn't really know how it was. This wasn't what I'd expected. I'd thought we were here for burgers and beers, not a work party. I tried to shake it off, to go with the flow. Maybe they'd just gotten a late start. Maybe in half an hour, the chairs would come out, and the grill would really get going, and this would be just a funny little blip in an otherwise normal afternoon. But as we stood there, I couldn't help but notice how no one really paused to chat. Melissa gave a quick wave and went back to pulling weeds. The cousin with the mulch nodded at us and kept moving. People seemed focused, like they had a task to finish and no time for small talk. Mark leaned over to me, his voice low. Did we walk into a backyard makeover show or something? I laughed quietly, but it was more out of nerves than amusement. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I'd shown up to the wrong party, like maybe I'd missed some key detail in the invitation. I replayed Ron's text in my head, barbecue, bring something if you like. Nothing about yard work, nothing about clearing space for a greenhouse. I watched as Ron grabbed a rake and started working on a pile of leaves by the fence. The sun glinted off the metal, and the rhythmic scrape of it filled the air. No one seemed to think anything was odd about this setup. No one else seemed surprised. Just me and Mark, standing there with our hands empty, our good clothes feeling a little too clean for the scene around us. I adjusted my cardigan, suddenly aware of how out of place I felt. Mark gave my hand a quick squeeze, his silent way of saying, whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. I smiled back at him, but inside, a little knot had started to form in my stomach. This wasn't the barbecue I'd imagined. And I had a feeling the surprises weren't over yet. I stood there, watching as Ron raked the leaves along the fence line, feeling more out of place by the second. Mark and I had barely had a chance to set down our things when the purpose of the gathering slowly started to reveal itself. I kept hoping that any minute now, Ron would wipe his brow, drop the rake, and say something like, all right, let's fire up the grill and crack open some beers. But that moment didn't come. Instead, after a few more minutes of watching people move around like they were working on some sort of home improvement show, Ron straightened up and called out across the yard. All right, everyone, he said, loud enough for the group to pause what they were doing. His voice had that tone, half cheerful, half commanding, that made it clear he was serious. Before we eat, let's make sure we get this space cleared. The greenhouse guys are coming Monday, and I don't want to leave this a mess. Shouldn't take too long if we all pitch in. My stomach sank. It wasn't like he said it in a mean way, but it was so matter-of-fact, like it had been the plan all along and we were all in on it. I looked around the yard at the scattered tools and bags of mulch, the gloves and rakes leaning against the fence, the sweat already darkening the backs of t-shirts. I looked down at my clean sandals and my light summer dress that I'd picked out so carefully, imagining an afternoon of sipping lemonade in the sun, not bending over flower beds pulling weeds or hauling bags of soil. Mark shifted beside me, and I could feel him glance at me, probably trying to gauge my reaction. His hand brushed mine, his silent way of saying, what do you want to do? Ron didn't wait for questions. He pointed toward the far side of the yard, where a mess of overgrown grass and tangled weeds crept up against an old shed. Cheryl, Mark, if you two wouldn't mind giving a hand over there? We need that corner cleared so they can lay down the foundation for the greenhouse. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. It was like my brain was trying to catch up, trying to figure out how we'd gone from a friendly barbecue invite to being assigned yard duty. I glanced at the patio table where I'd set down my pasta salad, the glass bowl gleaming in the sun, untouched. I started, then took a breath. I didn't realize we'd be doing yard work today, Ron. I don't think I'm dressed for it. It came out softer than I meant, like I was trying not to cause a scene, but the truth was, I felt caught off guard. Ron smiled, but it was one of those tight smiles that doesn't quite reach the eyes. It's just a bit of cleanup, he said, waving a hand like it was no big deal. We'll eat after. The sooner we get it done, the sooner we can relax. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. This wasn't what I signed up for. I thought back to the text, replaying the words in my mind. Barbecue. Bring something if you like. Not once had he mentioned work, or that this was more of a chore day than a gathering. Mark leaned closer, his voice low so only I could hear. What do you want to do? He asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just go along with it. I hate making waves, and I could already feel eyes on me. Linda, pausing in her sweeping, Melissa, standing with her hands on her hips, glancing our way. I could feel the weight of expectation, the unspoken rule that if everyone else was helping, we should too. But the other part of me, the part that felt a little tricked, a little blindsided, was bristling. This wasn't fair. I wouldn't have come dressed like this if I'd known. I wouldn't have spent time making food to share if I'd known we were here to clean up dog mess and haul debris. Speaking of which, that's when Ron added, almost as an afterthought, and if you see any dog piles over there, just scoop them up so no one steps in it. Melissa's mutts have been using that corner all spring. I stared at him, blinking like maybe I'd misheard. But no, he'd said it as casually as if he'd asked us to pass the ketchup. I felt Mark shift again, and this time, I could hear the hint of amusement and disbelief in his whisper. Did we really just get assigned dog duty at a barbecue? That broke through my shock a little, enough that I let out a quiet laugh, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you give when you're trying to keep from saying something you might regret. I don't think I can do this, I said quietly to Mark. He nodded. Then let's not. Ron had already turned back to the pile of leaves, clearly assuming we'd get started. The others were back at it too, not looking at us directly, but I could feel the energy shift. It was like we were on the spot, expected to fall in line. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to Ron. Ron, I really appreciate the invite, but I think we'll have to pass on the yard work today. We weren't expecting this, and I'm just not dressed for it. He paused, rake in hand, and for a second, the yard felt too quiet. Oh, he said, that tight smile returning. Well, all right. But you know, it's just a bit of work before we eat. It'd go faster if everyone helped. I could hear it in his voice, that subtle layer of judgment. Like I was being unreasonable for not wanting to ruin my shoes or smear dirt on my dress. I understand, I said, trying to keep my voice even. But I think we'll head out. I hope the project goes well. Mark was already picking up the cooler, ready to follow my lead. I grabbed the pasta salad, feeling the awkwardness settle over me like a heavy blanket. As we walked back toward the gate, I could feel the eyes on us. I didn't look back, but I could picture them, Linda with her broom paused mid-sweep, Melissa standing by the flower bed, the cousin still hauling mulch but probably smirking. We stepped through the gate and out to the street, the sun just as warm as before, the breeze just as soft, but everything felt different. Mark set the cooler down on the curb for a second so we could regroup. You okay? He asked, looking at me, really looking, the way he does when he knows I'm trying to keep it together. Yeah, I said, though my heart was still racing. I didn't expect that. It felt like a setup. Mark nodded. It was weird. But I'm glad we left. You don't owe anyone your afternoon of manual labor just because they called it a barbecue. I smiled, grateful for him in that moment. We stood there for a minute, the sound of birdsong filling the quiet between us. I could still smell the charcoal smoke drifting from the yard behind us, but now it felt like a reminder of what wasn't, what the day could have been. We'll find somewhere else to eat, Mark said. Somewhere with actual food and no shovels. And just like that, the knot in my stomach loosened. We packed up, got back in the car, and drove off toward the promise of a real meal, and maybe a little peace. I stood there, clutching the bowl of pasta salad tighter than I probably needed to, feeling the weight of the moment settle heavily on my shoulders. The sun was still warm on my skin, the air still smelled of charcoal and cut grass, but inside, everything had shifted. That cheerful excitement I'd felt on the drive over had drained away, replaced by this uneasy knot in my stomach that I couldn't shake. I looked around again at the yard, at Ron, who was back to raking with this determined energy, at Linda sweeping along the patio, at Melissa crouched by the flower beds yanking at weeds like they'd personally wronged her. And for a second, I wondered if I'd misunderstood. Maybe I was the one being unreasonable. Maybe this was normal for them, maybe this was how they did barbecues, mixing work with food, and I was just the odd one out for not realizing it. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself of that, it didn't sit right. Because it wasn't what we were told. It wasn't what I'd pictured when Ron sent that text inviting us for a barbecue. There'd been no mention of work gloves or shovels, no heads up that we'd be expected to pitch in before we even saw a plate of food. Mark must have sensed where my head was at because he leaned toward me, his voice low, calm. We don't have to do this, you know, he said. If you're not comfortable, we can go. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. The thought of leaving felt both like relief and like failure all at once. I hated the idea of making a scene, of being the one who refused to help when everyone else was busy. But I also hated the idea of ruining my dress, of spending the afternoon sweating and miserable, doing work I hadn't agreed to. I glanced down at my sandals, the ones I'd picked out so carefully, and imagined them covered in mud or worse. I thought about the pasta salad I'd made, the time I'd spent that morning getting everything ready because I'd wanted to contribute something special, something that felt like me. This wasn't the plan. This wasn't the day I'd imagined. I took a slow breath and stepped toward Ron, who was still focused on his pile of leaves. I spoke up gently, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to be polite without sounding like I was making excuses. Ron, I said, I really appreciate the invite today, but I wasn't expecting yard work. I'm not dressed for it, and I didn't realize this was part of the plan. He paused, rake in hand, and looked at me. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise maybe, or maybe disappointment. He didn't say anything at first, just kind of nodded, like he was thinking about how to respond. It's just a bit of cleanup, he finally said. His tone was light, but there was a hint of something else underneath, that edge people get when they're trying to stay pleasant, but are annoyed. We'll eat as soon as it's done. If everyone helps, it'll go quick. I nodded slowly, feeling my cheeks warm, though I wasn't sure if it was from the sun or from the embarrassment creeping in. I could feel other eyes on me now. Melissa glanced over, then looked away quickly, but not before I caught the expression on her face, that mix of surprise and judgment that made my stomach twist. Linda stepped a little closer, wiping her hands on her jeans. We didn't mean to spring it on you, she said, though her voice didn't quite match the words. It's just, we figured with everyone here, it'd be easy to knock out before lunch. No big deal. But it was a big deal, at least to me. Because I'd come here thinking I was showing up for something else. Because I felt tricked, even if they hadn't meant it that way. Because now I was standing in their yard, feeling like the odd one out, feeling like the difficult guest who couldn't just go along. Mark touched my arm lightly. "It's your call," he murmured. "But you don't have to do anything you don't want to do." His words grounded me. I thought about other times in my life when I'd felt pressured to go along with something just to keep the peace. I thought about the times during my marriage to Jake when I'd bitten my tongue at family gatherings, agreeing to plans I didn't want, letting myself be volunteered for things I didn't enjoy, just to avoid the awkwardness of saying no. I thought about how often I'd sacrificed my own comfort to make other people feel comfortable. And I thought about how I wasn't that woman anymore. I took another breath and forced myself to meet Ron's eyes. "I really don't want to mess up my clothes, and this isn't what we were expecting today," I said as kindly as I could. "I hope you understand." The air felt heavy in the silence that followed. Ron gave that tight smile again, the one that didn't reach his eyes. "Sure," he said, but the disappointment was obvious. "Sure. I get it." Linda gave a small shrug, like she was trying to brush it off, but I could feel the chill in her tone when she said, "Well, if you change your mind, there's gloves in the shed." Melissa didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The look she gave me spoke volumes. That look that said, "Must be nice to just stand there while everyone else does the work." I hesitated for a moment, debating. Part of me still wanted to stay, to maybe help a little just so I wouldn't feel like I was letting anyone down. I hated that uncomfortable tension, the way the mood of the gathering had shifted so suddenly. But deep down, I knew that if I stayed, I'd be miserable. I'd be doing it out of guilt, not because I wanted to. And that wasn't fair to me. Mark must have sensed my indecision because he quietly said, "Let's just go. You don't need to feel bad about this." That was all I needed. I nodded and stepped back, feeling the emotional weight lift just a little. We gathered up the cooler and the pasta salad, moving quietly toward the gate. No one stopped us, but the air felt heavy with unspoken words. As we walked back to the car, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I'd stood my ground, that I hadn't let myself get roped into something I didn't agree to. But sadness, too, because I hated that it had come to this. I hated that what was supposed to be a fun afternoon had turned into this awkward mess. When we reached the car, Mark set the cooler down and looked at me, his expression soft. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "Yeah. I feel bad. I didn't want to make it weird." "You didn't make it weird," he said. "They did. You were honest. That's not something to feel bad about." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He was right, of course. But it didn't stop the lingering sting of judgment. The way Melissa's look had made me feel small. The way Ron's voice had cooled just enough to let me know I disappointed him. We loaded the car in silence for a minute, and as we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the house. The yard was still full of people moving, working, focused on their tasks. The grill smoke curled into the sky, and for a brief second, I felt a pang of what might have been, what the day could have looked like if things had been different. But as Mark reached over and took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze, I reminded myself that I'd made the right choice. I'd chosen honesty over guilt, my own comfort over obligation. And that was something I wouldn't regret. Mark and I didn't say much as we walked back to the car. The only sounds were the soft crunch of gravel beneath our feet and the distant hum of conversation and work continuing in the yard behind us. I felt the weight of every step, like leaving was this small act of defiance that somehow mattered more than it should. The warm afternoon sun touched my shoulders, and the breeze that rustled the trees felt soft and kind, in stark contrast to the coldness I'd felt from the people we'd just left. I opened the passenger door and slid in, setting the bowl of pasta salad on my lap. I glanced down at it, the careful curls of raw thyme, the bright pops of red and green from the peppers and herbs I'd chopped that morning, the dressing glistening in the sunlight. It seemed almost silly now, this effort I'd put into something meant to be shared at a table that never got set. Mark settled in behind the wheel, glancing over at me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, like he already knew how tangled up I felt inside. I nodded, but I felt the tightness in my throat, the sting at the backs of my eyes that I was trying hard to blink away. "Yeah," I said quietly. I don't know. I hate that it turned into that." He reached over and took my hand, giving it a squeeze. "I'm proud of you, you know." That made the tears well up even more, though I managed to keep them from falling. For what? Walking away from a barbecue that wasn't a barbecue. For not letting them guilt you into something you didn't want to do, he said. That took guts. Most people would have just gone along with it to avoid making waves. I smiled at him, grateful more than I could say in that moment. I didn't always give myself credit for standing up for what felt right, but Mark saw it. And that mattered. As we pulled away from the house, I glanced back once, just a quick look at the yard we were leaving behind. The figures of people moving about, the rake in Ron's hands, the pile of mulch by the fence, it all seemed distant already, like a scene from someone else's life. Mark asked, "You want to just head home, or should we find somewhere to eat?" I didn't even have to think about it. "Let's go somewhere. I don't want this afternoon to feel wasted." "All right," he said, already turning the car in the direction of town. "I know just the place." The drive was quiet at first. The kind of peaceful silence that isn't awkward, just two people sharing space, letting the world pass by for a bit. The road wound through stretches of farmland, fields glowing golden in the late afternoon sun, old barns with rusted roofs, fence lines that seemed to go on forever. The kind of scenery that always reminded me of simpler times, of childhood car rides with the windows down, and my mom's hand tapping the steering wheel in time with whatever song played on the radio. Mark's thumb rubbed slow circles over my knuckles as he drove. I let myself breathe, really breathe, for what felt like the first time all afternoon. The tension in my shoulders eased little by little as the house and the awkwardness we'd left behind faded further into the distance. About 15 minutes later, we pulled into the gravel lot of a little place I loved, a small country pub that had been there for decades, tucked between an old gas station and a hardware store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 60s. The sign out front, hand-painted and weathered, simply read Leroy's. The kind of place where no one was in a hurry, where the booze had worn vinyl seats, and the waitresses called you Han whether they knew you or not. We stepped inside, and the cool air from the ceiling fans felt like heaven after the warmth of the afternoon. The place smelled like coffee, fried food, and something sweet baking in the kitchen. The low murmur of conversation mixed with the clink of dishes and the soft twang of an old country song playing from the jukebox in the corner. A waitress with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair greeted us with a smile. "Just the two of you?" "Yeah," Mark said. "Anywhere's fine." She led us to a booth by the window, the sun casting soft light through the glass, dust motes dancing in the beams. We slid into the booth, and for the first time that day, I felt like I could finally relax. The menu was simple, comforting. Burgers, sandwiches, chicken fried steak, plates of fries and onion rings, pie by the slice. Food that didn't ask anything of you but to enjoy it. Mark grinned at me across the table. "What do you think?" "Cheeseburger and fries to make up for the lunch we didn't get." I laughed, a real laugh this time. "That sounds perfect." We both ordered burgers, mine with extra pickles, his with bacon, and we split an order of onion rings because, as Mark said, when in doubt, add fried food. I ordered a sweet tea, he got a root beer, and when the waitress walked away, we sat back and just let the atmosphere of the place wash over us. There was something about that little diner, the hum of conversation, the smell of food cooking in the back, the ease of people enjoying a lazy afternoon, that felt like a balm. The tension I'd been carrying started to melt away. Mark reached across the table again, his fingers lacing with mine. "I'm really glad we left," he said. "Me too," I admitted. "It was just not what I expected. And I felt bad. I still kind of feel bad." "I get it," he said. "But you didn't do anything wrong. They didn't tell you it was going to be a work party. You had every right to say no." I nodded, thinking about that. He was right, of course. But the guilt still lingered, like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. I thought about the looks on their faces, the way Ron's smile had gone tight, the way Linda's tone had cooled. I hated disappointing people. I always had. But I also knew that if I'd stayed, if I'd forced myself to stay out of guilt, I would have been miserable and probably resentful. The food came, hot and perfect. The burger was juicy, the fries golden and crisp, the onion rings just the right kind of greasy. I took that first bite and felt some of the tension finally slip away. The simple pleasure of good food, of being with someone who understood me, was exactly what I needed. We ate, we talked, and we let the weirdness of the afternoon become just another story, something to laugh about someday. Mark teased that at least I hadn't gotten stuck scooping up dog mess in my sandals, and I joked that next time someone invited me to a barbecue, I'd be sure to ask if it came with a chore list. By the time we finished our meal and stepped back out into the fading light of the evening, I felt like myself again. The breeze was cooler now, and as we walked back to the car, I realized that leaving had been the right choice not just for my clothes or my shoes, but for my peace of mind. As we drove home, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges, I thought about boundaries, about how hard they can be to set but how freeing it feels when you do. And I thought about how grateful I was for Mark, for the kind of partner who stood by me, who didn't question my choice to walk away, who helped turn a disappointing afternoon into something warm and good. And as the diner's sign faded from view in the rearview mirror, I smiled, knowing we'd found our own kind of peace after all. The drive home from Leroy's had been peaceful. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting the sky in soft pinks and purples that made everything feel quieter, gentler. Mark kept the windows cracked just enough to let in the cool evening breeze, and the radio played low, something mellow that matched the mood. For the first time all day, I felt like I could exhale. I'd stood my ground. We'd turned a strange, uncomfortable afternoon into something good. And I thought, maybe that would be the end of it. But as we pulled into the driveway and stepped inside the house, that calm started to unravel. I set the pasta salad on the kitchen counter, untouched, still as perfect as it had been that morning when I'd made it with so much care. Mark grabbed us a couple of glasses of water, and we sank onto the couch, tired in that way you get after an emotional day. I picked up my phone, not because I wanted to, but out of habit. And that's when I saw it. A notification from one of those social media apps I didn't even check that often anymore. A tag from Melissa's teenage daughter, of all people, a photo of the yard, people working, and a caption that made my heart drop. Some people showed up for a barbecue and bailed when it was time to actually do something. Guess not everyone's up for a little hard work. Face with gears of joy, #lazy, #princess. I stared at the screen, my mouth going dry. My face burned, not from the sun this time but from the shame and hurt that came crashing over me. I clicked into the post, my fingers trembling a little. There were already a handful of comments, some from cousins I barely knew, some from friends of theirs I didn't even recognize. Figures. Bet she didn't want to mess up her manicure. Some people can't handle getting their hands dirty. I felt sick. Mark noticed the change in me right away. "What is it?" he asked, leaning closer. I handed him the phone, unable to find the words at first. He read in silence, his jaw tightening. I could see the anger flash in his eyes, but more than that, I could see how much he hated seeing me hurt. "That's low," he said finally, setting the phone down on the coffee table like it offended him just to hold it. "That's just plain low." I nodded, swallowing hard. The knot I'd felt in my stomach all afternoon returned, tighter than before. It was one thing to feel judged in person, to see the looks and hear the tone of people who thought I should have stayed. It was another thing entirely to be mocked online, for strangers to see my name, my face, and think I was some spoiled woman who couldn't be bothered to lend a hand. I sat there, staring at the phone, my mind racing. I thought about writing back. I imagined typing out a comment explaining what had really happened, how I hadn't been told it was a work party, how I'd shown up dressed for a social afternoon, how I'd made food, how I hadn't been lazy, just blindsided. I thought about defending myself, about setting the record straight. But then I imagined the replies that might come. The eye roll emojis. The snarky comments about being too sensitive. The way people twist your words until you regret saying anything at all. Mark saw the battle going on inside me. "You don't owe them a thing, Cheryl," he said gently. "Let them think what they want. The people who matter know the truth." I wanted to believe that. But it was hard. Because it wasn't just about that one post, that one afternoon. It was about all the times I'd been misunderstood. All the times people had painted me as something I wasn't. I thought about high school, when I'd quit the softball team because practices conflicted with helping my mom take care of my younger siblings, and people said I was lazy, a quitter. I thought about my first job out of college, when I'd spoken up in a meeting about an idea I believed in and got labeled as difficult for not just nodding along. I thought about all the times I'd chosen peace, chosen to walk away rather than fight to be heard, and how often that choice had been twisted into something ugly by others. And now here I was again, sitting on my couch, heart heavy, because someone had decided to reduce me to a #. Mark reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "Look at me," he said softly. I did, and his expression was steady, sure. "You did nothing wrong. Don't let them make you doubt that." I nodded, blinking back the tears that were finally starting to slip free. I wiped them away quickly, feeling foolish for crying over a post, over a few thoughtless words. But it hurt. God, it hurt to be seen so unfairly. I put the phone face down on the coffee table, trying to block it out. "I keep thinking I should say something," I admitted. "But I know it won't help. It'll just make it worse." "You're right," he said. "It wouldn't change their minds. And it's not your job to change them anyway." We sat there for a long while, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge, the faint sounds of the evening outside, birds settling in, a neighbor's dog barking in the distance. I thought about how easy it is now for people to be cruel without looking you in the eye. How a few taps on a phone screen could undo an afternoon's worth of courage and boundary setting. How social media, for all its good, had this dark side where people forgot there was a human being on the other end of the post. Eventually, I let out a long breath, the kind that felt like I was trying to blow all the heaviness out of my chest. "I'm not going to reply," I said. "I'm just going to let it go." Mark squeezed my hand again. "That's my girl." It wasn't easy. The hurt lingered, and I knew it probably would for a while. But as the night went on, as we put on an old movie and curled up together on the couch, I reminded myself that I had nothing to be ashamed of. I'd set a boundary. I'd chosen respect for myself over pleasing people who didn't care to understand me. And in the quiet of our home, with Mark beside me and the noise of the online world left behind for the night, I found a little bit of peace again. It's been a few weeks since that strange afternoon, but the memory of it still lingers, though in a different way now. I've had time to sit with everything that happened, to let the emotions settle, to untangle what I felt in the moment from what I know now. And the truth is, I don't regret the choice I made that day. Not for a second. If you'd asked me a few years ago, before Mark, before I started really learning to listen to myself, I don't know if I would have had the strength to walk away. I probably would have smiled tightly, kicked off my sandals, and forced myself to help, even though I was uncomfortable, even though it wasn't what I'd signed up for. I would have done it because I didn't want anyone to think badly of me. Because I was afraid of being labeled rude or selfish, or, like that post said, lazy. I spent a long time in my life worrying about that, about how people saw me, about making sure everyone else was happy, even if it meant I wasn't. But that day was different. That day, I listened to my gut. I paid attention to that knot in my stomach, that voice that said, "This isn't right for you." And I'm proud of that. Because I've learned that setting boundaries, real, honest boundaries, isn't about being difficult. It's about knowing what you're willing to give and what you're not, and standing by that. It wasn't easy. It didn't feel good in the moment to see the disappointment on Ron's face, or the judgment in Melissa's eyes, or to read those hurtful comments later. No one wants to feel like they let someone down. No one wants to be misunderstood. But I've come to realize that people will see what they want to see. They'll create their own story about who you are and what you should have done, and most of the time, it has more to do with them than with you. What matters is the story you tell yourself. And the story I tell myself about that day is this. I showed up with kindness. I came prepared to share food, conversation, and connection. When the situation changed in a way I hadn't agreed to, I chose honesty over obligation. I chose to respect myself. And that's something I can live with. Mark's support through it all has meant more than I can put into words. I've always known he had my back, but that day reinforced just how lucky I am to have a partner who respects my choices, who doesn't try to sway me for the sake of appearances, who helps me find peace even when things get messy. We've talked a lot since then about family, about boundaries, about how we want to handle situations like that going forward. And as for the family dynamic? Well, it's complicated, like most families are. I don't think Ron or Linda or the others meant harm. I think, in their minds, they saw the yard work as a practical thing, a way to get a job done while spending time together. Maybe they assumed everyone would be on board. Maybe they didn't think about how it would feel to spring it on guests without warning. But just because they didn't mean harm doesn't mean it wasn't harmful in the moment. That's the thing about boundaries. They aren't about punishing others. They're about protecting yourself. I didn't leave that day to hurt anyone's feelings. I left because staying would have meant going against what felt right for me. Looking ahead, I know I'll handle things differently. If I get another invite from that side of the family, I'll ask more questions up front. I'll want to know, is this a social gathering or is there work involved? And if it's the latter, I'll decide ahead of time if I want to be part of that. No more showing up without clarity, no more assuming everyone's idea of a barbecue matches mine. I hope that next time, if there is a next time, there's more transparency. I hope that maybe they learn something too, that it's important to communicate clearly, to set expectations so people can make informed choices about how they want to spend their time. And if not, well, that's okay too. Because now I know how to speak up for myself. I know how to say no without apology. And I know that the people who truly care about me will understand, even if they don't always agree. For anyone out there who's ever found themselves in a similar spot, feeling pressured, feeling judged, feeling like you have to go along to avoid rocking the boat, I want to say this. Trust your gut. It's okay to choose yourself. It's okay to step away from something that doesn't feel right, even if people don't like it, even if they don't understand. You don't owe anyone your comfort, your energy, or your time just because they expect it. I'm not perfect at this. I still have moments where the guilt creeps in, where I replay the afternoon and wonder if I could have handled it differently. But then I remember that every time we set a boundary, we're practicing self-respect. Every time we say no to something that doesn't serve us, we're saying yes to something that does, our peace, our well-being, our truth. So where do I stand now? I stand in a place of peace. I stand knowing I did what was right for me, and that's enough. I stand ready for whatever comes next, knowing that I can face it with honesty and strength. And I stand grateful for Mark, for the lessons I've learned, for the growth that came from an afternoon that didn't go at all how I imagined, but taught me more than I could have planned. If you've been with me through this story, thank you for listening. And if you like these kinds of honest, messy, real-life stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more interesting life stories. There's always more to share, and I'd be honored if you'd join me for the next one.